At this point, I would like to quote an article by a guy named Jacob Gabriel Hale, and this is what I wasn't able to do in the first one, but I have time now. It's an excellent article. It's called Derrida, Van Til, and the Metaphysics of Postmodernism. Now, these quotations are fairly lengthy. I've got about a page and a half of quotations, but it's, I think, important for you to hear it in context. But it will serve, of course, to get the overall point. This is an article in which Hale compares how Derrida and Van Til rejected classic foundationalism, but also how they came to radically different conclusions. Hale sets out to demonstrate that the questions often asked by postmoderns are misdirected because they're asking questions regarding epistemology, how can we know anything at all, without first referencing the question of metaphysics, what actually exists. This is a lengthy quote, but it is necessary to grasp what is being said. Also, some of it may sound redundant, but that will serve also to help you grasp it. Now, this is Hale. This is what he says. Ontologically speaking, Van Til asserts that the natural world is not simply materialistic, static, and mute of meaning, but rather all things embody a certain active God-revealing quality. Therefore, the metaphysical makeup of the world is inherently revelatory, always speaking, always revealing meaning. As humans, we are surrounded by the handiwork of God, in which His very being is revealed. Therefore, things have an active, revelatory character as opposed to a mute, static nature, one that lies meaningless until language is attached to it. Ontologically speaking, the being of God is revealed in all things. Therefore, all things are inherently meaningful, including mankind's own constitution, and therefore are actively revelatory in revealing God's being. We are as well. So for Van Til, the history of philosophy has gone wrong in asserting a metaphysical understanding of reality that is impersonal, abstract, and inherently meaningless. According to Van Til, the revelation of God in creation and in man is in fact the foundation in which all other knowledge is gained. According to Van Til, this knowledge of God that is revealed in all things is non-inferential, non-discursive. That is to say that the knowledge of God is not derived or inferred from nature, but is rather immediately apprehended. According to Van Til, the knowledge of God is not inferred, induced, deduced, or derived from any sort of evidence, fact, or observation. Rather, the knowledge of God is immediately apprehended at the moment of consciousness. Let me say a word about what he means by immediate knowledge really quickly. I'm stepping out of the quote here. What he means by immediate, he means to say that our knowledge of God is not derived from a process of evaluation, but is immediately known to us. Let me give you an example. Dr. Rim, I know Dr. Rim, okay, but there's two different ways that I can perceive and know Dr. Rim, okay? There's an immediate way of knowing him and an immediate way. An immediate way would say this. All right, I see his ears, I see his hair, I see his nose, I see his lips, that's the structure of his face, therefore that's Dr. Rim. I go through a process to come to that understanding. There's also another way I can come to know, or I can know Dr. Rim, and that is immediately. In other words, I'm looking this way, and I turn, I just know that's Dr. Rim. There's something within me that can identify that without going through a process of knowing it. That's what he's saying. That the knowledge of God is immediate. We don't have to go through these steps to know God. Rather, it's within our own constitution, and the world constantly screams it. So, let me continue with the quotation. So, Van Til does not ground knowledge in any abstract principle, but rather in God, who is revealed to all men in an immediate, non-inferential manner. In other words, rather than asserting that knowledge is grounded in reason, sensory experience, and causality, Van Til asserts that reason, sensory experience, and causality are in themselves grounded in God. In this sense, Van Til, y'all already talked about Reformed epistemology, or the article by Flanagan. In this sense, Van Til can be called a non-foundationalist, because the knowledge of God is not derived, induced, or deduced, but rather is that which constitutes our very consciousness. The knowledge of God does not serve as a properly basic belief in which all other beliefs are built. The foundation of our knowledge is non-inferential and non-discursive. Therefore, our knowledge of God is not contingent upon other beliefs or proper principles of knowledge. In other words, the knowledge of God, according to Van Til, is not simply a proposition in which other propositions are justified. Rather, knowledge of God is the necessary transcendental precondition for all other knowledge. Given what we have seen, this is still him, given what we have seen concerning Van Til's metaphysics and epistemology, by the way, I'm quoting snippets out of a 14-page article, okay, just so you know. It's a great article. You can get the whole thing on the internet. Given what we have seen concerning Van Til's metaphysic and epistemology, there are some preliminary implications that can be drawn in regards to the nature of language that stand hard against Derrida's assertion and open the door for a rethought Christian understanding of language. Words as signs are inherently meaningful because that which constitutes them are our experience as meaningful human beings living in a meaningful world with other meaningful human beings. In other words, because God is continuously revealing himself in all things, including ourselves, our representation of things in signs is inherently packed full of meaning. When he says signs, he means like language symbols, things we attach to what we derive from God's revelation. For Derrida, this is not possible because metaphysically speaking, there is nothing outside of us that is inherently meaningful. However, for Van Til, this is not only possible, but the contrary is impossible due to the revelatory ontology of all nature and the self. If this ontology of nature, the human self, and language as divine self-expression is accepted, then this takes the epistemological dilemma posed by Derrida and turns it on its head. Instead of asking the question, how is meaning possible, the question becomes, how is meaning not possible? And that's the end of the quotations. In summary then, Van Til holds that God is constantly revealing himself through nature and the very being of man, both simultaneously. Therefore, man cannot help but experience and know God. At this point, Van Til is simply continuing in the tradition of Paul when he said on Mars Hill, "In him we live and move and have our being." 3, and the last point, I think we're actually going to have time for questions. That's scary. Okay. All right. Number 3, arguing from the impossibility of the contrary. William Lane Craig, responding to Frame's presentation after critiquing his position as simply circular reasoning. I don't know if you all read the critique of the presupposition. I don't know if that was required, was it? No. Well, in William Lane Craig's critique, he critiques it and says basically it's just all circular reasoning. But then he says this: if this, circular reasoning, were all that presuppositionalism had to offer as an apologetic, it would be so ludicrous that no one would have taken it seriously. But at the heart of presuppositionalism lies an argument, often not clearly understood or articulated, which is very powerful. This is an epistemological transcendental argument. I quote this to demonstrate that Craig admits that presuppositionalists do offer arguments. According to Craig, powerful ones at that. I bring this up to dispel the common misconception regarding Van Til that he was a fideist. Van Til was active in his writings against fideism. His argument, its short name is called TAG, Transcendental Argument, is so powerfully forceful that he believes that there is no argument that can be sustained against God's existence. So, in all actuality, Van Til is more of an evidentialist than the evidentialists themselves. Now, throughout my presentation, I've given you nuggets that would suggest how to argue transcendentally. Now let me give you some key elements taken from within the Christian worldview. This is if we're planted in the Christian worldview, that will help us understand the grounds for the necessity of arguing transcendentally. I've got 4 of them. The first one. Number 1. The most certain thing that can be known in the entire universe and in the consciousness of man is that God exists. That's number 1. Number 2. Men know that God exists, but suppress that truth in unrighteousness. Number 3. God has created the world in such a way that true knowledge of facts and meaning itself are only possible if we understand them in relation to God. Number 4, because God does exist, and because he created all things and owns all things, there is no such thing as neutral ground, ground which the unbeliever can enjoy as a safe haven, free from the judgment of God, ground in which he can be said to have in common with the believer. All ground is God's ground.